everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about Miltoniopsis orchids, how to take care of them from watering to reblooming. I know some of you have difficulties with these orchids, but I find them not as hard to grow as some say. As in fashion, in orchid styles seem to come and go. In the past, Miltoniopsis were extremely popular in the orchid hobby. From the late 80s well into the early part of this century, famous orchid books were filled with drawings and photographs of magnificently grown plants covered with flowers. I hardly understand why these lovely orchids passed from being favorites, but sure they did. The decline in popularity can be associated with a reputation for being difficult to grow. I agree that Miltoniopsis are not among the easiest orchids, but they are not that difficult to grow and rebloom if you follow a few easy rules, as I will show you further on. Hopefully, this belief that Miltoniopsis are tricky to grow will soon be a busted myth. The wonderful show that a well-cared Miltoniopsis will give you will well worth the little extra effort that is required. I am thinking at Miltoniopsis as different orchids, but not difficult to grow. Miltoniopsis are sympodial, epiphytic orchids with very thin, flattened, ovate grey-green pseudobulbs and measure maximum 6 cm in height and about 4 cm in width. These orchids usually produce 2 to 10 basal leaves that fan up from the base of the narrow edges of the mature pseudobulb and have a single, narrow, medium green leaf on the top of the pseudobulb. They do not have any shine on the leaves or pseudobulbs, being easy to distinguish them when you purchase them at sales with no blooms by their cousin oncidiums, and it is very important to know this to properly take care of them. The pansy orchid requires low light intensity, about 800 to 1200 foot candles. If your orchid is receiving too much light, the foliage will turn yellowish in color. If your orchid is receiving too little light, the foliage will turn dark green in color. If you are growing your Miltoniopsis indoors, an ideal place would be on a shaded eastern-facing windowsill. The Miltoniopsis orchid likes cool to intermediate temperatures, about 60 Fahrenheit or 16 Celsius and 75 Fahrenheit or 24 Celsius. It will tolerate higher temperatures, but not for too long, and only if the root system is good and the orchid is properly hydrated. As with most orchids, increasing relative humidity when exposed to higher light and temperatures will help to keep the plants from becoming overstressed. I feel that 50 to 80% relative humidity is best for Miltoniopsis, but if you have a good root system and you keep your orchid well hydrated, you won't really have too many problems. It is important to ensure good air circulation to avoid fungal infections and other diseases which are more likely to appear when high humidity is provided. In case you have low humidity, you can use humidity trays, mainly trays with pebbles and water, or if you can afford, the best thing is to use an ultrasonic humidifier, all in combination with a fan. In my environment, for whatever reason, I do not need to go through this because I have very high humidity, especially in the colder months, about 60 to 85%. I do believe that if you stay in the recommended temperature range and if you keep your Miltoniopsis well watered, humidity is not a critical factor. And here I go again, in order to keep your orchid well watered, you need to have a Miltoniopsis with a decent root system. Miltoniopsis, because of their relatively fine roots, like to be evenly moist. In easy terms, this means your orchid pot should have the same level of moisture on all the levels of the pot all the time. And I cannot separate this section from the potting medium recommended. I believe that the best potting medium for this orchid is inorganic medium. You can make your own choices influenced by preferences and availability between ceramics and clay pebbles, called also leca or hydroton. I prefer to do for Miltoniopsis semi-hypodronics. This means you will always have water in the reservoir of the pot or in the tray. The ceramics or clay pebbles will absorb and wick the water to the top of the pot, and if you take care to have water at all times in the reservoir or tray, you should have your orchid well hydrated and safe from accordion-shaped leaves. And since we are talking about watering, you must know that this orchid's roots are extremely sensitive to salt buildups, basically to many minerals accumulated in your orchid medium. For this reason, I prefer to use inorganic medium that won't ever decompose and break down, won't become too acidic and kill the roots. In case you see some white deposits on the medium, you only need to soak the orchid pot in a decorative container in distilled or rain water for about 15 minutes. I consider these orchids harder to save from root loss when you don't have a bigger specimen, and usually you only find in stores plants with 2 or 3 pseudobulbs, but it is not impossible if a few luck factors are met, but we will talk about saving Miltoniopsis in a different video. If you use inorganic medium, you only need to repot when your orchid has overgrown its pot, and you only need to remove the old pot and place it into a bigger pot with some more clay pebbles around. I prefer to use mini clay pebbles that are sold in 1 liter bags and have the size 4 to 8 millimeters. A sure sign of underwatering would be the formation of wrinkled accordion-like pleated leaves. However, this type of leaf wrinkle can also develop from overwatering that causes the roots to rot, therefore depriving the plant from absorbing water because of the lack of roots. This whole concept with overwatering is associated with the traditional bark sphagnum and perlite mix, and you cannot really rot your Miltoniopsis roots in semi-hypodronic. For this reason, use a clear plastic pot to be able to check your plant root system when uncertain. Miltoniopsis have very tender and fragile roots, so I recommend you use rainwater whenever possible. Reverse osmosis systems are another way to filter your tap water and provide clean water for orchids. In my environment, because I have so high humidity, I need to use for my self-protection a dehumidifier. The dehumidifier is collecting some water in a reservoir, and that water is clear from any minerals, so I can use that water for my orchids, especially when I fertilize them, and for my carnivorous plants and for Miltoniopsis. I fertilize my Miltoniopsis with every other watering with a fertilized water that contains 200 ppm. My fertilizer is a 2510 NPK, with a reminder that the nitrogen source should only be nitrate or ammonium, since urea is very harmful for orchids. It is a good investment, a TDS meter, so you can find out how many ppm are in your water, no matter if that is distilled water or tap water, and properly make the concentration of fertilizer you want for that specific orchid. I strongly believe that is more important than the recommended dosage on the label, as the seller doesn't know from what range you started. Remember to flush out the pot thoroughly to avoid harmful salt accumulation before any fertilizer. This means that first I water with clean water, and only after that I apply fertilizer to the orchids that need it. A sign of salt buildups are the blackened leaf tips and the white deposits on the orchid medium. Miltoniopsis will tend to make up to 2 sets of growths during the year, in spring and summer and in fall and winter. If potted in the fall, when the new growths are approximately 2 inches tall, the plant will have the maximum time to reestablish. Miltoniopsis, like most orchids, do their best if allowed to grow into good-sized clumps. A 5-bulb division should be the minimum acceptable size, as larger plants reestablish more easily, grows and flowers better, and is more resistant to adverse climate and cultural conditions. You might get away with 2 or 3 pseudobulb divisions if there is a new growth available that is about to produce its root system. Miltoniopsis are susceptible to the same type of pests as most orchids, this being mainly sucking insects as aphids and spider mites. It is, however, necessary to use extra caution when treating Miltoniopsis with oil-based insecticides, because their thin, tender foliage is more susceptible than most to burning. Fungal or bacterial rot can be a problem with Miltoniopsis, although usually only when the plant have been allowed to run down because of poor cultural techniques. If all has gone reasonably well, you will see flower spike emerging from the base of the newly matured pseudobulbs right in between the bulb and its first leaf. Flowers will tend to be at their best during the cold season. This will most often come from the bulbs initiated in the fall and matured in the winter. Summer flowers will generally be smaller and weaker in color. These orchids usually do 1 or 2 spikes per bulb. The number of flowers per spike depends on the type, breeding, and the size of the plant, as does the flower size to an extent. If you have a specimen-sized Miltoniopsis, you will have better chances for a massive show. Each spike can produce anywhere from 2 up to 10 blooms. The blooms of these orchids are large, up to 12 cm, flat and round, with broad lips. Blooms are seen in an array of bright colors such as yellow, pink, red, purple, and white, often with a waterfall model. They are amazingly fragrant, having rosy-like perfume, citrusy or floral, some varieties stronger than others. Although fragile-looking, these lovely flowers last from 15 to 60 days on the plant. Unfortunately, they cannot be used as cut flowers since they would last for only 1 day. As you can see, Miltoniopsis are not as hard to keep, especially if you do semi-hydro, to keep them well hydrated. If you can keep them in a place with not too much sun and a temperature around 23 Celsius. If these factors are met, relative humidity is not as important anymore. Even if the temperature is a bit higher, if your orchid has humidity in the pot, the one from the air is less important. I hope this information drawn from my experience is going to help you have success with these lovely flowers. I must confess this is in my top 3 favorite genera, mostly for their wonderful fragrance and colorful blooms. Thank you for watching! If you have liked this video and you found it useful, hit that like button below and subscribe to my channel because I post new orchid videos every single Monday and Friday. Thank you for watching, bye bye!